super busy right now.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Whistle Blows. We are absolutely delighted to be joined again by two representatives from the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust in what has been a quiet couple of days, I'm sure, for these guys, given I'm sure everyone has seen the coverage following the meeting with Spurs and the minutes. So we're going to do a little bit of a debrief on that and chat a little bit about the survey results as well as I think before you came on, Tristan, with Mike, we were just at the stage of finalising the survey. We didn't quite have the results, so we'll have a little bit of a chat about that. But thank you so much for making your time free to join us today, Tristan. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Thanks for having us on. Yeah, what was it, about 2 weeks ago? We did this last time, and
a lot's changed since then in the football club, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We've got a new manager.
Results. We've had the meeting. We've published the minutes. We published the minutes that almost were, and Thomas Frank is no more.
Indeed, and Mike has changed a little bit. We've got Jo instead from the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust. So thank you so much for joining us, Jo. How are you?
Yeah, all good, thanks. All good. They say a week is a long time in politics. That's my background. 2 weeks at Tottenham Hotspur is a really long time in terms of, turnover, change, etc. Difficult to keep up with. But yeah, thanks for inviting us on and delighted to be here.
Well, that Newcastle game was only a week ago, can you believe it? And it feels like years ago, doesn't it? So much has changed since then.
It does indeed. And Bill, lovely to be joined by you as always. Obviously, I missed the show at the weekend with Croatian footy, which was a really good show to catch up on. I suppose that's probably the best place to start before we jump into the more juicy stuff around the survey and the minutes and the meeting. But Tristan, love to get your take on what was the end of a fairly short Thomas Frank reign. How you're feeling about that, and how you're feeling about Igor Tudor coming in.
Yeah, well, I think it was long overdue, wasn't it? Personally, I went up to the Newcastle away game in the Carabao Cup at the end of October, and I was starting to think that it was time for a change at that point. And we had a few ups, but far more down since then. So I think, definitely before Christmas, I think personally, I was thinking, what's going on here? We need to make a change in direction. So it feels like it's a little bit late, but Igor Tudor is not the name that I was expecting to come in. I wasn't expecting Johnny Heitinga to go after just a month. 33 days, 8 games, I think, and not a single win in that period. So lots of surprises, but I don't know much about him personally, but from what I read, he's very good at coming in for short stints and turning a club's fortunes around. So, I and many other Spurs fans are going to get behind him, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you, I didn't know a huge amount about him. Obviously, done more research and digging since we've had a couple of shows related to the appointment. And I think at this stage, with what seems mad to talk about, but a relegation battle beckoning, I think there is nothing but getting behind him for sure. And Jo, obviously first time having you on the show, and thanks so much for joining. Love to hear a little bit about your history with Spurs, and then perhaps if you pivot into what you made of the Thomas Frank sacking and Tudor appointment.
Yeah, so I've, in fact, I just was checking earlier because I couldn't remember exactly when I first got my season ticket, but I realised this is my 30th season.
Wow.
So I'm celebrating my 30th season, although the word celebrating is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Sometimes it feels like a life sentence as opposed to but anyway, yeah, so 30 years I've had a season ticket and a membership a few years before that. I sit on the lower east stand and go to the game with 3 other women, actually, which is which is great. A little pocket of women amongst the throngs of the crowd. So in terms of Thomas Frank, actually, it took me a little bit longer to get to the idea of that he had to go. And I think the Newcastle game was in the end what turned it for me. I kind of had this idea that he could just get us through to the end of the season, and then the summer we could do something proper. New manager, really think about what the ambition for the club was, and bring in the manager that suited that ambition. But that all changed at the Newcastle game, and I finally joined the idea that he had to go. And then I think in terms of the new appointment, I mean, there's only one thing for us to do, and that's, get behind him and get behind the team, because it's a real battle now. I was at a party on Sunday. There was myself, a Notts Forest fan and a West Ham fan, and we were sitting there working out which one of the three of us was going to be at the end of the season, and hopefully it's the West Ham fan. But it could be us. So there's only one thing to do now, which is to sort of unite the fan base behind the team, because I think they'll need us, and behind the manager, and just hope that we get to the end of the season still in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Bill, you were obviously someone who was, I think it's fair to say, sceptical of Frank pretty early on, unlike me, who was obviously wrong and an advocate for his appointment. And like you, Jo, I was hopeful we might be able to see it through, a little bit longer. And my view always was I'd love to have seen us hire a sporting director first and let that person pick the next manager, because I'm very concerned about the current cohort of individuals who will be picking the next manager, although no doubt it'll end up being Poch. But Bill, love to get your take on Tudor's first interview, because obviously that went out, I think today, wasn't it? I'm losing track of days. I think it was today that went out. And from what I saw of it, it seemed a very, very different way of talking to Thomas Frank, but love to get your take.
Yeah, and I think, one of my biggest disappointments with Thomas Frank, and I think it kind of originated when I think it was around the Fulham game, when the whole sort of culture around booing came into fruition. And then obviously after that one, Vicario put one in that essentially made a howler, and then we conceded very quickly. And that's when the sort of home fans really turned on Thomas Frank's Tottenham, and there became that sort of culture war around booing. And I just think in general, from about then onwards, almost every Thomas Frank press conference, he would say something that was completely baffling, or just, he's sort of rereading it thinking, did a Tottenham manager actually say this? And I think it started with the sort of, they're talking about the booing and the home fans, and he mentioned like true fans and all that kind of stuff. And often the Thomas Frank press conference, he just left me just feeling like, what on earth is he doing here? Like, how is he? I think he just needed some real guidance around, how to handle the sort of big pressure. And it's obviously a completely different job to the Brentford job, because in a Tottenham press conference, you're going to get so much more scrutiny and so much more attention, and everything you say is going to get picked up by, the biggest publications, and that's just the part and parcel of being with a big six. And I think he really struggled to be able to deal with that. And I think, Tudor's just come in straight away, and he just seems very straight talking and no nonsense kind of thing, which I really liked. And I liked the way he was very aware of the situation. He didn't sort of dress it up as being like, oh, I'm so proud to be here. This is, the biggest massive club and all that kind of thing. He just said, look, I'm aware of the situation. I know what's going on. I know what to do. And he just said straight away, it's not about me. It's about the work that we're going to do. And it was just straight talking. And I think, I think it's interesting when you go from one manager to another, the sort of difference in styles. They do seem quite different in the way that they address the press and things. He just seems like a very straight talking, no nonsense kind of guy, which is, I think, hopefully what we need right now. But just Tristan, coming to you, because it seems to me, obviously, if we're on a bit of a tightrope in terms of relegation and the R word of relegation. How are you feeling about the possibility of? Do you think it's a realistic possibility that Tottenham could actually be going down? Because I don't know about you guys, Tristan and Jo. Me and Connor have already spoken about this. After that Newcastle performance, I was really fearing the worst.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how close to a loss I am. I think when I'm walking out the stadium and sitting on the coach going home after another loss, then I think it's a very, very realistic possibility. And then a few days pass, and you have a look at the league table, and you see that there's still a bit of a gap. And
when West Ham were 1-0 up, when they were 1-0 up that night as well, it was a bit terrifying.
Yeah. but you know, we have got a run once we get past Liverpool. I think we've got a run of a few 6-pointers, and hopefully we can come through those, and we won't get embroiled in the thick of the relegation battle. But as I said, you know, if I sit through another 90 minutes the same as we did against Newcastle, then I'll be, you know, completely depressed and thinking we're in a relegation dogfight.
Yeah, for sure. And I know, Jo, you already mentioned that obviously it was your turning point, that Newcastle game, and I think that is probably the case for any fans that were still on the fence. So anyway, onwards and upwards, I suppose.
I mean, it's interesting. People have said to me, well, Spurs are such a big club, they can't possibly go down. But of course, and we are a big club, a great club. But if you don't win games, then, you know, it doesn't matter how amazing your stadium is or how many people turn out to see you, you know, bring home a trophy. If you don't win games, then you will go down. And that's that's a kind of reality that we're looking at now. And I mean, you know, fingers crossed it won't be, but, you know, we can't just say we're a big club and it's not going to happen to us.
And Jo, we've obviously in the stuff that's transpired since this week, and you'd have to imagine, you know, particularly with like Heisinger going and things like that, and then obviously hired the Brentford physio. Do you think it's only this is the first time that they've sort of taken that threat of relegation seriously, and that's the reason why Frank lost his job? Because it seems like they're doing absolutely everything to keep him there, didn't it, at first? And that, you know, he even said straight after the Newcastle game himself that he thinks he's still going to be on the job tomorrow. And then obviously that's the famous last words now. But do you think they were sort of clinging on and trying to get through to summer, but then suddenly the possibility of relegation was what made them pull the trigger?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I don't, you know, who knows what the exact conversations are that go on at the club and who's making the decisions and etc. But I think if they hadn't have acted after the Newcastle game, then you know, then there would have been, well, we would have been in big trouble. And so somebody did something, and that's great. I don't know who it was and why, but it was definitely the right thing to do.
Great. And obviously in times like this, and what has felt like a couple of years of being a Europa League winner side, a tough time to be a Spurs fan and to be a Spurs fan that attends home games as well as a season ticket holder like you guys, and seeing very, very little wins in the Premier League. Obviously, it's interesting timing for you guys in terms of the survey before we come on to the actual meeting with Tottenham itself, and obviously the fallout from the minutes. Tristan, I wondered if you wanted to give us a little bit of an overview of sort of the survey results and where we landed on the survey overall. And I have to say, I think when you guys, because this is, I think, the second time that you've done the 5 principal survey, is it, or a similar one?
The fourth time.
Fourth time, sorry. I remember looking at the results, and I think it was in the summer, and I just assumed it was out of 5, and then realised it was out of 10, and then I felt like, okay, yeah, that does probably more fairly represent where a lot of fans are feeling. But yeah, I'll leave it to you to sort of run through where we are.
Yeah, thanks. And you know, we opened with this in the meeting, so I'll talk through the survey results, and then when we come to the meeting, I'll talk a bit about the context that we set for it in the meeting. So this is the 5 principles were agreed by our AGM back in 2025 in February, and we came up with them because we wanted to succinctly set out some principles, not only for the current leadership, but any future leadership. And obviously the leadership's changed since we came up with these principles, but also we've got them in mind for any future owners or leaders of the club. And there are 5 things that we think if the club does well on, then everyone will be happy, essentially. And the 5 principles, you shared them on screen there: commit to winning, attract and retain talent, future-proof success, lead with integrity, and fans first. So just dealing with each of those in turn, what do we mean by them? So commit to winning, what we want there is invest to the level needed to secure league and cup success. That's transfer windows, that's infrastructure, that's backroom staff, everything's included there. Attract and retain talent. We want a competitive transfer policy and competitive wages that enable us to secure the top players. It seems that there has been a ceiling on the transfer fees that Tottenham can pay and the wages that Tottenham can pay. And we've seen the Deloitte survey that comes out that commonly puts us below 50% of revenue on wages, whereas clubs like Aston Villa are up in sort of 94, 96% of their revenues going on wages. So we don't think that that's sustainable, but clearly somewhere in the middle would be more competitive. Future-proof success is about developing elite youth talent to strengthen the squad and sustain excellence. So we want to be able to ascertain that there's a pathway from the youth teams right through to the first team, and a playing style that's coached at a youth level to right through to the first team. Lead with integrity is about ethical standards, strong governance and financial sustainability, but keeping ticket prices affordable. And Fans First is about engaging with supporters, consulting with us, not making decisions at the last minute without talking to us, to build loyalty, passion and success on and off the pitch. So we ran this 4 times in the last year. The scores are out of 10, but you can't actually score a 0. So the lowest score you can give is a 1. And that's important when I read out some of the scores for the latest one, because 1 is the lowest possible score that you could get. To begin with, the average scores were sort of between 3 and 6. The highest one was always coming through as future-proof success. Lucas Boval was our player of the season last year. So you can understand that supporters felt that there was a pathway for young players to come through to the first team. There was a bit of a blip, a bit of a bump after the Europa League, but not much actually. That didn't mask too much. There was still sort of underlying dissatisfaction. When we ran it this time, I'll just read out the scores for the most recent one. So commit to winning, that sort of dropped from about 3. The final score there was 1.65. Attract and retain talent came out at 1.94. Future-proof success at 2.96. Lead with integrity at 2.2, and Fans First at 1.9. So the highest one was 2.96, which was future-proof success, but that was down from sort of 5 or 6 where it was before. So that was sort of roughly halving. And the lowest one was commit to winning, which was just 1.65. I repeat again, the lowest score that anyone could have given was a 1. We had a really good sample size for this one. We had about 4,500 responses. So a really good cross-section of the supporter base, not just members. It was open to any Spurs fan to complete. So we presented those to the club. We gave them a bit of advance notice before we met them on the 3rd of February, and that was the sort of opening piece for our meeting.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I think and it's a good sample size, right? It's, as you say, 4,500 of which consists of members and non-members, and you're going to get, you would think, a range of views in terms of who's critical of the ownership versus people that may be a little bit more open to them changing. But I mean, no scores. I mean, that is rough listening in terms of how low they are. And I suppose if the club were rationalising it a little bit themselves, they might argue that fans are always going to demand a certain amount, right? You know, like I work in employee pay, right? And I don't know anyone that says that they're paid too much. It's a sort of similar principle. Fans just want trophies. So you might expect that it's very difficult to get like 9s and 10s, but to be down in the 1s, I mean, is pretty terrible, right? And I think that shows where we are as a fan base right now. And The other question I was going to ask, and I'll come to you on this, Jo. How seriously do you think the club are taking these principles and these survey results?
It's difficult to know, really, because we present them and then they sort of nod and take them away. I think, I mean, I wasn't in the meeting, but Tristan will confirm that some of the scores upset them and they thought that they were not valid, or not that they weren't valid, but that, they were unfair. And maybe they do think all the scores are unfair, but I think that I don't understand why they don't know this already, and why their connection. I mean, obviously we're the trust, and we represent, supporters, and we survey supporters, but I don't understand why they don't do that job. I mean, any big organisation is constantly asking its customers or whomever what they're thinking, how they're feeling, and it seems to me that the club doesn't know, and fine. So we're presenting what our findings are and what we're showing, and they don't like it. But on the other hand, they have no evidence to show that there is an alternative view. But the other thing that I think is important, and if I think about the people that sit around me, there is a desperation to show goodwill towards the club from fans. We love the club, really. I mean, we hate it sometimes, but we love it and we want to love it more. And so that, the idea that, everyone's sort of upset and moaning, there's a reason for that. And actually, give us something else and you'll get 5s and 6s and 7s, quite easily. But you have to put in the work, and you have to earn that, I think. And I think they're not really trying very hard to earn that at the moment.
I think that's a really, really good point that you make there, Jo. And I think you only have to look at the Manchester United game, where the away fans were an incredible voice for the whole duration of that game, despite being down to 10 men and despite being 2-0 down. And then, the Man City game, 2-0 down, second half, the fans were unbelievable. I think you're so right. I just feel like fans just are desperate for something to cling on to, and we have been all season. And we've took a lot of flack this season as a fan base, I think, from all kinds of various sources. But I think it's been a really testing time, and we've shown, all we are looking for is something to believe in. And Tristan, I just wondered, obviously, I don't think it's a shock that those numbers came out low. I think, if you any kind of measure of the fan base right now, any kind of temperature check, I think everyone's aware that it's, there's a lot of frustration in the fan base. Was there anything in the survey results that surprised you at all in particular, or is this essentially what you were expecting?
Yeah, I think it's what we were expecting, given where we were at the point that we ran the survey. But if I look back to the first couple of times that we ran it, and we presented the findings in our meeting with Donna Cullen, and we thought they were low then. They were coming out 3s, 4s, 5s, and Future Proof Success was almost at a 6, and they were quite embarrassing then, and there was a serious point that they were bad and that the club needed to improve, but we sort of said, well, there's only one way that these results can go at that point. And how wrong were we in that they come out now, and I don't know actually that they can get any lower than this. I was
going to say, unless you add the 0, then I don't think they can get any lower unless you start adding the 0.
Well, I think that's right.
or a minus number maybe.
I don't get a sense that the club was surprised when we discussed the results either, actually. They'd had advance notice, so we weren't getting a sort of live reaction from them. The only one that they really sort of not took issue with, but queried was the Future Proof Success, because they made the point that Archie Gray's played loads of times, and Lucas Burvell, before he's injured, has played loads of times. So we are putting youth players into the first team. And I didn't say this in the meeting, but what was running through my head was, well, what choice have we got? We haven't got any other players to play. They're playing out of necessity. So I don't know where we go with that. I mean, it was a little bit embarrassing, this part of the conversation, actually, because it was so bad, and there's nothing really that you can say about it because the club has said so many times that it's actions, not words. So you kind of just got to take it on the chin this time, and then go off and try and do better before the next meeting and the next survey.
Yeah, and I wonder. Sorry, Bill. I was just going to ask. I wonder whether you could bring to light. I mean, obviously, I know you guys speak to a lot of the trusts of other clubs as well, and there is involvement in terms of some of the broader sort of FSA stuff and all of that type of stuff. Do other clubs run similar surveys, or have similar principles? And do you have any sense of a benchmark? How are we benchmarking against those other clubs? Or is it difficult to say?
I don't know of any other similar surveys that are run, and I certainly don't know of benchmarking. I mean, there are organisations out there that try and benchmark things like fan engagement, but that's not really benchmarking fan opinion. That's sort of benchmarking the steps that clubs take to engage with their fans, not necessarily what fans are saying. It's something that I thought that supporter trusts and FSA could be a bit better at, is trying to gauge something across all supporters to try and work out where supporters are. And they could come up with some sort of league table or something. It's a league table that we might stand a better chance of being higher up in at some point.
I wouldn't be so sure. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Yeah, I mean, it's a really fair point. I think because I think that to be fair, I mean, we've got particular frustrations with this ownership, particularly Billie and I, and with the strategic direction of Tottenham. But I think it's probably a fair point to make that across the Premier League now, there's a lot of frustration with their ownerships. We're not the only fan base that is arranging protests. There are huge pressures in terms of ticket prices. We discussed this last time, Tristan and Joe. I think it's fair to say that there is a frustration quite generally with the fact that it feels like as fans we're being fleeced, and the football clubs are not on our side.
Definitely. And I don't know whether you saw the Arsenal Supporters Trust have just published their response to the ticket price rises that Arsenal are announcing, which are eye-watering. I mean, obviously, we work really closely with the FSA. Recently had a meeting through the FSA with the Premier League and raised issues around ticketing. There's also issues, around TV scheduling, which doesn't work for fans at all. Games being moved, kickoff times being changed. People have already made arrangements, etc. And it does feel across football, across the Premier League, that fans are sort of incidental almost to the game and to the businesses. And yes, lots of frustrations with ownerships. The West Ham fan that I talked to on Sunday, hugely frustrated at what's going on there. So yeah, I mean, it is difficult, but there are still opportunities. There's the independent football regulator coming in, and if we can sort of bring together fan groups, as you suggest, not just in surveys but in sort of action, then I think there is a power for us in doing that.
Brilliant. And we could, I think it's interesting because obviously, there's a lot of sentiment going around various different football clubs at the moment. Lots of protests. I saw Arsenal today, as you alluded to there, Joe, have raised their season ticket prices by 4%. I dread to think what would happen if Tottenham did that at the moment after this season. But I think there's definitely growing frustration among all kinds of fans at the moment because we are sharing similar frustrations. For anyone that is listening now on audio, we will go into a quick break and. What we'll try and do at the end is the same as what we did last time. Is if you do have any questions for Joe and Tristan, please put them in. If you have a super chat as well, we'll guarantee to answer it. And then I think it's a good place to go next would be to the meeting. And obviously, Tristan, just to kick us off with that, I just wondered, sort of, for fans that are listening, because we never, unless Amazon are doing a documentary, we never really get to have a look at what the sort of logistics of this kind of thing is like in terms of a behind the scenes level. What is it like on attending that kind of meeting? What's the sort of setup? And just for a little behind the curtains kind of look before we go into what actually happened in the meeting, what's it like to actually attend those meetings? How does it sort of work behind the scenes?
Well, it's usually in an evening, so you finish your day at work and then you've got to make your way over to Tottenham. So for me, that means I've got to fight through the North Circular. It takes me sort of an hour and a half to get there. It's a bit weird when you get there because they do let you park. So you drive up that ramp that goes past the ticket office, which is normally full of people. So that feels a bit weird. Then you sort of park on the stadium concourse, and then you go into Lily White House, which lots of supporters will know about. And there's loads of Spurs branding, and there's the golden cockerel in there, and you go up the lift to go upstairs. And then they've got a reception area, and they're very quickly they've got the sort of roll of honour, and they very quickly added the Europa League to the bottom of that. That went up within days, I think, of winning. And then we normally go into a meeting room that's just off there, so we don't get to see much of inside. But there's sort of an oval table, and we just sit around it. No one has a seat. We sit in different seats every single time, and it looks out onto the stadium. So without all the Spurs branding, it would just look like a bit of a boring office, possibly. I've just seen a comment about custard creams or bourbon biscuits. It's neither, I'm afraid. It's neither.
Wow. No,
they do let us have water and coffee.
I was going to say that's nice of them. I did wonder whether they did the whole sort of Wolf of Wall Street thing, where if anyone's seen that film where they whack the heating down to the very minimum, so that you have, particularly when you're presenting survey results like this. But it's nice to hear you get some hospitality at least. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the meeting itself, so obviously the main purpose was to run through the survey results, which, as you said, they got the sort of initial sight of. I suppose more generally, I wanted to get your sort of your take on what they thought when you went into sort of the detail on that. What was their sort of immediate response other than, okay, yeah, that's low? Was there any sort of actions that come out of it from their side? It doesn't seem like particularly from the minutes there were, but wondered if there was any sort of flavour or context you could add there, Tristan.
Well, I think first and foremost, they do genuinely want success for the football club. I do believe that. Whether they can do it or not, then we'll find out, won't we? But they do genuinely want to make the football club successful, and lots of them have come very, very recently. Within the last couple of months, really, and there'll be even more change now. We're on the football side with the change in coaching staff, so that there has been an awful lot of change, and they do genuinely want success. We did feel the need to sort of say to them openly and out loud exactly what supporters are going through. We wanted to say that supporters are concerned that I think generally supporters recognise the amount of change that's happened, and that they will give them time, but not much, and not whilst the club looks like it's in free fall. So we wanted to get across that. We wanted to get across how bad it is only winning 4 home league games in a year. It really does make it a painful trip, and sometimes a painful watch as well. And we wanted to let them know that supporters are genuinely concerned about the risk of relegation. Now they are 100% focused on trying to avoid that and trying to avoid the worst happening, and I do believe that. But then when we got into the detail of some of the principles, there were things there that unfortunately we've heard before, particularly when we get into attract and retain talent and the transfer window. And I mean, I think this is probably where they make a bit of a rod for their own back. One of the things they're trying to change from the former leadership is that they don't want to buy the second choice. They don't want to buy players that aren't going to immediately come into the first team and make a difference. Unfortunately, they didn't really buy anyone after Conor Gallagher. And the trouble with that, I suppose, is that in wanting to make that particular point of being different, then the pressure is really on them to make a signing. And one of the things they explained, which did go into the agreed minute, was this misconception about where, if we'd been prepared to pay for Semenyo, for example, where did that money go? Why wasn't that spent? The money that was raised from the share issue from the Lewis family, where did that money go? And they did want to address a misconception that's sort of sitting around in a war chest somewhere, because the financial results of the football club are such that they haven't turned a profit since 2018, and we are paying the price as a football club for spending lots and lots of money on transfers for players that we just haven't been able to sell. And other football clubs are much better than Tottenham at doing that, and we are paying the price for that now. So we're sort of in a perfect storm with that at the moment, where they don't want to buy the second option or the cheap option. They only want to go for the first rate. But whilst the club's form is in free fall, we're just not attractive, are we? I mean, Semenyo was never going to join Tottenham given the other options that he had on the table. So I don't really know where we go from here, unless there's some sort of magic answer that I can't think of. If that's the type of player that we want, and there is the money there available for that type of player, but not for the second or the third choice, then how do we make our club attractive if Arsenal and City and Man United are going to go for them? I don't know that I can't tell them the answer, but then I'm not paid the big bucks to do the jobs that they're doing.
And speaking of that exact point there, I saw that, attended the meeting with Vinay, Kate Miller, who's Chief Communications Officer, Jake Keefe, who's Head of Supporter Engagement, and Ellen Young, who's Business Operations Lead. I guess a lot of the concerns are around the first team and as you mentioned, the transfers and things like that, which I guess is sort of Vinay's department. Is it sort of in the meeting? Is it sort of all Vinay that's sort of handling these things, or do they all kind of chip in? Because I guess a lot of the concerns are, particularly around the first team and the transfers and all, the relegation, all that kind of stuff is on his head, kind of as a CEO. Is he the one that's doing a lot of the talking in these meetings?
Yeah. I mean, he's the one that does lead on things around the sort of playing side and the football side. Kate will come in, and Ellen and Jake on the sort of the relationship between the club and supporters and the communications between the club and supporters, which we touched on again, and that's been a big theme of all of our meetings. We think the communication has changed, but I think we still want further changes in how the club communicates with supporters. So that's Kate and Jake and Ellen. I mean, Kate is very, very new to Tottenham. I think she's just sort of 2 months in, so she's even newer than Vinay.
Makes sense. And I read through the minutes, and I have to say, I obviously agree with your point there around Semenyo, and I think we're now feeling the pain of what has been, a number of bad decisions that has now put us into a place where we are less able to compete for that type of talent. And what a shame it was that we didn't strike whilst the iron was hot when we had, Poch's team, and we were missing those bits and went free transfer windows without signing the player, etc., without, digging up all of that history. I do find it slightly disingenuous, I have to say, when the club makes the point that they've not recorded a profit since 2018 and use that as a sort of rationale as to why things are tough, because that's the way that football clubs are, right? I mean, you will have seen Brentford and Brighton have just released their results recently, two of the well-run football clubs. They both, between them, made £150 million operating loss, right? So And the fact that we haven't made a profit is primarily driven by the fact that we've got depreciation on the stadium, which is not actually a real cash cost. It's an accounting measure. So, I find that slightly disingenuous. I find it particularly as well, over the last 20 years, we've always been in the top 2 in terms of EBITDA, the actual cash that we create from our operations, because of the fact we have low wages and we're able to create all of these different revenue streams. So as a football club, the finance bit is very, very, very strong, right? I think the problem that we have, comparably to some of the clubs around us, is that relative ambition of the owners to put in money to top up to then try and compete. And I know, obviously, I saw in the minutes there was the mention of the 100 million. Do you think they've got a sense, or did they imply to you that the owners are going to put their hand in their pocket to put more money in, or did that not come up in the meeting at all, Tristan?
I mean, where else would the money come from? I mean, they didn't tell us who their transfer targets are, and I wouldn't have expected them to. We did discuss Semenya, but only because Thomas Frank had gone public in a press conference, I think, and said that we'd gone for him. So we don't have a detailed discussion on transfer targets, obviously, but I don't see where else the money would come from. If we are going to compete, it has to come from the owners.
And then obviously we'll go on to what happened sort of in the wake of the meeting next. But just one sort of final summary question on the meeting itself, Tristan, is when you came away from the meeting, as the 4 of you that attended, what was the sense of sort of how the meeting went, and what you thought of the how sort of seriously the ownership took the stark realization that the fans are really frustrated at the moment? How did you come away from that meeting feeling? And then we'll go on to sort of what happened in the wake of that with the minutes, etc.
It was definitely different. The atmosphere was different. It was more somber. The previous meetings, there was still some hope, I think, in those meetings, and it was still new. And as Jo said, 2 weeks is a long time in football. So I think what's happened over the last 6 months or so has taken a toll. But equally, it would have been wrong, I think, if they approached the meeting, they were all upbeat, given that we opened it by saying things are really, really bad and we don't like watching Tottenham at the moment, and we've only won four times in the last year. So I think the tone was probably right, but it was more somber. I think what was slightly disappointing, I suppose, is that we recognise that they're new, and we recognise that it needs time to turn things around. But there's almost a sort of, the things that have happened in the past, they weren't our fault. And what we would say to that is, look, we're not trying to blame anyone, but you have to understand the history that we've gone through as Spurs fans if you want to understand how we feel and why we react in certain ways to decisions. And I think particularly when we're asking for more communication, we're asking for communication that empathises with us and understands us and treats us like supporters, like long-standing supporters, that have been following for decades, and gives us, that respect. And I think some of the communications, either they're individual supporters or they're things that the club tells us about the changes that it wants to make. I mean, I certainly, when I read those and when I hear those, I just want to know a bit more. I just want to understand, okay, but what's the underlying plan? Why are you doing this? What's it going to mean for the football? You bring these people in and you tell us where they've come from, but tell us a bit more about their job. Tell us about what skills and experience they're going to bring, and then what that will mean for us. Because at the moment, I hear all these names that I don't know, and they've got all these job titles that I don't know what they mean. But I would like to know what they're actually going to be doing when they set foot inside the training ground at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. And I don't feel we've quite got that yet.
And then, Jo, obviously yesterday, and I implore anyone listening that's not seen it to go straight to the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust official website, which is THSTofficial.com, and check the minutes on there, because it's a really interesting read. And obviously, you guys published a story yesterday where you posted the minutes, but then also, a big story since then has been that there are a number of specific points raised during the meeting which the club did not agree to include in the final published version, despite our requests. Now, before we sort of go into what happened there in terms of what was omitted and what wasn't, what's the sort of process like in the wake of the meeting then? Is it like a back and forth exchanges of emails where the clubs are sending things, and how does that work behind the scenes before we go into what was actually sort of omitted and not included?
Yeah, so there's a draft created, and there's a toing and froing of commentary on the draft, and that process sort of should only take a little bit of time, and then you get to an agreement and publication happens. I think with these minutes, that process in and of itself took longer than we would have expected, and clearly there was something going on. There was a sort of longer version created, and then what came back to us was a short version, and obviously a short version is fine, but it doesn't work for us and our members. And obviously the thing that's unique and key about the trust is that it's a membership organisation, and that we're accountable. Tristan and I are on the board, but we're there as a result of the membership, not in and of our own right, as it were. And so it's vital that we have the ability to share with the members and obviously the wider supporter base what's gone on. And that's why it was imperative for us to be able to say a bit more about what happened at the meeting, and to set out what some of the other points that we raised were. Otherwise people would think that we weren't. I mean, lots of people think we're not doing our job properly anyway, and will let us know that, but doubly so if we hadn't have created a sort of a longer set of minutes. So I think it's really important for the sort of democratic nature of our organisation, but also accountability to the fan base in general. And I'm not really sure why the club was fearful of that. They've actually created something that needn't have been created. And it probably would have gone by unnoticed, or certainly unnoticed in the media, if they had just sort of accepted the sort of longer version in the first place.
And then and then before we go into the actual omissions themselves, then a kind of case of did you sort of communicate to the club, well, we're gonna do our own thing anyway, and we're gonna post a longer version? And was there any back and forth between the club there, or did they sort of, or were they? I assume they must have had an idea that was becoming.
Yeah, I think Tristan, we confirmed to them, didn't we, that if they wanted the shorter version, that we would be publishing a note of what else was discussed.
I mean, the weird thing is that they produced the first draft of the minutes, right? And it had some narrative in there, but we felt that it didn't include the bits that we thought were important for supporters to know that we'd said in the meeting. So we put those in and suggested them. Now the club never said they don't accept those, and they never said you can't put those in. What we then got back was there's too much narrative in these minutes. We want them to be formal. So we had something then that looked like what we've actually published as an agreed minute. Now, we agreed those minutes, so I don't want people to think that the trust hasn't agreed them. No. We've agreed them as an accurate record of the meeting, but we felt that it didn't capture the full flavour of the conversation. So when we agreed them, bear in mind that we agreed them 10 days after the meeting had taken place, and a lot had happened since that meeting. So we felt it was important to let supporters know what had happened at the meeting. We'd have people asking us, of course. So we did want to get them out there. But we said to the club, look, when we publish these minutes, we're going to be making all the points when we publish them that we suggested in our amendments that we put forwards. And, we'd always say if there's something factually incorrect in there or commercially sensitive, then let us know. And we didn't hear back. So from my perspective, we agreed the minute, and we agreed that we were going to publish a story that set out all the points that we tried to put into the minutes, but ultimately didn't make it.
And obviously,
I think there's a couple of points. Sorry, Bill, I didn't mean to cut across you. There's a couple of points for me, and Jo, you raised one just then, which I think is really, really pertinent. We were chatting about this backstage. They have created this issue, and it's just another example of a PR disaster after PR disaster at this football club, right? Because I've read through the points, and as Billie says, implore anyone else to read the points in terms of what was omitted. There was nothing there that is particularly contentious, right? And I think I said this backstage to you guys. There was nothing there where you were trying to present a view of the club. You were just giving the view that you had obviously presented in the meeting, minuting that accordingly, and tying it to Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust name rather than them. So it seems that they've created this issue themselves, which is really worrying for me, because what that implies to me is that they are so fearful of a narrative being tied to the club that they don't necessarily agree with, which God knows how they're not seeing, to your earlier point, is really, really worrying. And the point you raised earlier, Jo, as well, around what other business doesn't survey its customers and doesn't, and doesn't get the feeling of how their customers are feeling. But I think because of the uniqueness of being a football fan, whereby, I can't change my choice. I can't go down to Woolwich to go and watch them, and I can't, I have to go to Tottenham because it's in my blood. They just take us for granted, is what this all implies to me.
Yeah, I think, in general, there's a lack of communication with fans, I think, and that goes back to what I said earlier about the idea that there is goodwill amongst Spurs fans, but at the moment we don't really know what is the plan, what's the strategy, what's the vision, any of those things that you would normally expect. John Lewis articulates to me a vision. I know what type of company they are, who they want to be, where they're going, etc. And I decide, you buy into that or not. But the club seems to go from one sort of bit of chaos to the next bit of chaos, and we don't really know what the overall plan is. And I think if they could communicate with us what the ambition for the club is and what the vision is, and then we could see the stepping stones along the way to creating that vision, I think there would be much, everyone would be a lot happier. And I think this, the fact that they've taken this stuff out of the minutes, you're right, it plays to sort of a fear of a narrative, when actually a much more open stance and sort of communications articulated better would actually bring a lot of goodwill from people, because we could all share in understanding what the journey is that we're on.
Yeah, and I've got to jump in a second, guys, but I know Connor's going to stay on. I just wanted to say thank you so much before I do go, because it's been an eye-opening and really fascinating discussion. I know Connor's going to stick around just to finish off, though. But I just wanted to ask before I go, Tristan. So Jo touched on it there as well. For those that are listening on audio, we do have the sort of omissions on the screen now, and again, you can see them on the THST official website, and it's been picked up by things like The Athletic and the BBC. Just from being in the meeting and then what happened after it. And I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of the club there, just asking your opinion. What is the reason why these have not been trying to make sense of that from a club point of view? Why do you think some of the, because if we're just reading here, for example, now, things that are not included are things like, fans are concerned at the current position and the direction of the club. I don't think any of these things are surprising to anyone, including the club themselves. Fans are generally concerned at the risk of relegation. The belief generated by the Europa League win has now been lost. These are all things which are, almost factually true. from a club, why do you think that the club have asked these to be the omitted? Because I personally can't make any sense of it.
I don't think I can either, Bill. I've got no idea, especially given that we said that we would run a story that covered the points that we made, because we felt that it was so important to be transparent on this. I can't see any reason other than the one that they gave us. They wanted the minutes to be a sort of, formal, concise bullet point list of discussion points. Now, that's one view of minutes. It's not my view of minutes. I think a minute should be an accurate reflection of, the full tone and content of a discussion. You shouldn't just capture a decision or an action. It should capture what you spoke about to get to that point. And I think, our amendments do that. I'll continue to think that. I think that we should have included a narrative in the minute. And if that had happened, then it probably would have got less attention, frankly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, one of the points I did notice as well, cheers, Bill, thank you, was, and I think we discussed this last time, Tristan, I think I asked you the question about, are there any KPIs that underpin the strategic principles? Because obviously on the face of it, the principles are obviously very succinct. How are the club measuring that? And I did notice that they didn't like your paragraph around the fact that you had asked to see those KPIs, and more worryingly, they'd not yet been agreed by the club internally, which to me again is a bit of a worrying sign, because that tells me that they're not putting again the importance on these principles that you like to see. And I think I know one person said that I saw on YouTube, they sort of challenged whether, is it right that we should see the KPIs? But to me, actually, in any business, I could go into the annual report of anyone, Tesco's or whatever, and they do list their KPIs, right? So that's very, very normal for a business to do that. So what do you think their reluctance is again there? Do you think it's just that they don't know what they are?
I think this is all quite new. So I think they've been out to their staff and they've sort of they've reformulated their strategic objectives. And I look at them and I think, well, they're just sort of rebadged 5 principles. But if you work in a big company and you see a new chief exec come in, then they always want to bring a new strategy. So it's no surprise that Vinay has done that, and he's assembling a top team around him. So it's normal. From my perspective, for them to be reformulating this strategy and getting buy-in from their staff, and they've clearly got to go through all of that and then agree the KPIs with their board as an executive leadership team. So if they haven't done that yet, then I totally understand why they wouldn't share them with us. But it does tell you. It sort of reinforces the fact that they are very, very new, and that they're still assembling the team. There's still new people that have been appointed but haven't yet started, and they're still at early stages whilst everything that is happening on the football pitch is happening. So I do empathise with them. The reason that I asked them about the KPIs, of course, is that. That they are saying that they're different, and for years we were told that just qualifying for European competition was a success. So what I want to get at from a personal perspective is, okay, you're saying now that you want to win. You don't just want to be there to make up the numbers and to get the competition participation money. You want to win, so hopefully that's reflected in the KPIs, and that's why I've asked for that, and we'll keep on asking for it. At some point they will be set, they will be agreed by the board, and they won't be able to say that they're not set, so we'll keep asking.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I see Tom has made this point. They're more internal. I think, Tom, to the earlier point I mentioned, I think you have a set of KPIs that's external as well as obviously internal. You might have some more commercially sensitive stuff and more detail, but I think it's completely normal to have something that is external facing as well. I think it's all well and good coming out with the statement that Vinay made in the programme around the time of the protest of, we acknowledge the wage bill, for example, has been an issue in the past, but we do need to start to see a measurable outcome. How do we assess that they are actually addressing that? Now, to me, if your wage to revenue ratio over the whole 25 years that ENIC have been here has averaged 47%, it's currently at 44, was 42 the year before, that suggests to me they're not changing, right, as it stands. So, you know, and a KPI, for example, could be, you know, we're going to aim to have our wage to revenue ratio in the 50 to 60% mark. So it's not unsustainable, Tristan, to your point about Aston Villa, perhaps, but is more sort of where you'd expect it to be for a club of our size. And it just seems like those things are not necessarily changing, which is obviously why fans are very, very skeptical. I suppose one of the questions I wanted to ask you guys was, and we probably should have covered this at the start, but it comes down to really the crux of what is the trust's role, right? Because I see, you know, I think you guys do a fantastic job in terms of a lot of the ticketing issues. And I think clearly, you know, I would see your role, but you'll describe it a lot better than this as, you know, trying to reflect the views of supporters and get them across to the club. And I think you guys take a lot of flack sometimes, even in response to this recent story, where people are perhaps projecting the frustrations they have on the club's board onto you guys as if you can actually suddenly force them to sell. But love to hear, so two things. One, what you view your role as, and two, whether that role gets compromised when you challenge the ownership in the club in perhaps the way that you have done on some of these matters and indeed in this minutes piece.
Do you want to take that one, Joe?
You're on mute, Joe.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so in terms of our role, I mean, we have a formal role with the club. We have a memorandum of understanding which sets out that sort of formal relationship, and we have very specific areas on which the club is obliged to consult us on, and it's slightly different to the fan advisory board. Where we're different to the fan advisory board, of course, is our membership and our sort of democracy and accountability. I think our role is obviously, as you say, to let the club know what supporters are thinking, but also we do make tangible changes. Now, they're not, we can't make the big change, so we can't change the ownership. We can't, affect that, whether people want that or not. That is not something that we can do, but we do, through negotiating like a trade union would, I guess, deliver improvements, as you say, on the ticketing front. We support fans when they're traveling away. We sort of not litigate, but we represent individuals in some of the difficulties that they've had with the club. And, recently over the automatic cup scheme, we managed to get people reinstated and stuff like that. So we can get these sort of, little bits of, stuff done with the club. We can do some proper business with them. But yeah, we're the sort of voice of fans, and we do our best to fans are not a homogenous group. That
No,
1, 2, 3 fans in a room, and you'll get 16 different views, which is why we do our annual survey, and we try best to reflect the view that comes through that survey, and anybody's entitled to fill that in. So yeah, it's a combined role really. But to your point about are we compromised, I don't think we fear the club, and we don't fear making our point of view heard in the strongest possible way. But we try to do it in a pragmatic way to maintain the relationship, because if we have no relationship with the club, then worse things could happen. Tristan, I think it's add anything to that. Sorry,
Tristan.
Yeah, I mean, Joe and I are both elected onto the board of the Supporters Trust, so we're sort of temporary spokespeople for the trust, and we won't stay on forever. And then other people will come and take our place. So we've got a duty whilst we're here to represent the views as supporters express them to us, and as our members express them to us. And I don't think the club doesn't expect us to do that, and certainly, you know, Kate and Vina, experienced leaders, they know our role, and they expect us to do that. But you know, to the same extent, I wouldn't expect us being honest to sour the relationship, because we do it in a professional way. We're pragmatic. We do respect the pressure that they're under and the challenges that they've got. And as I said before, I do genuinely believe they want success for the football club. So with all that in mind, I think we've got a relationship where we can be honest with them, and we can hold a mirror up and say, this is what the supporters are saying. And I hope that they find that valuable. And you know, to give the example that Jo's just given of the automatic cup scheme, you know, Michael, who was on the last pod, he did a fantastic piece of work collating all of that. But I don't think that the senior leadership at the football club would have realised the scale of the problem if it wasn't for the trust. Because individual supporters contact us about issues in our inbox, and we get hundreds of emails every single day that we all see. We can see when themes emerge. We can see when particular decisions or policies are causing problems. And I don't see that there is another mechanism within the football club currently that can pick those up if it isn't for the trust having that route in. And I think they do appreciate that, because it does give them the chance then to respond and to actually, you know, go back down through the hierarchy of the football club and to change things that are happening that they don't like or they think are not optimal.
That makes sense, and I think that's the balance that you guys are trying to strike. And you know, I said this to you backstage, and I think it's as I say, there's so much fan frustration at the ownership right now. I think some of that naturally gets projected on you just because you are seen as the voice of the supporters, and therefore, you know, naturally that will happen. I think, you know, and I've always sort of said that the work that you're doing in terms of some of those smaller wins, as they were, but important wins for fans are absolutely crucial in terms of making sure we get them. I think the challenge will always be, whilst there is this frustration with the ownership, I think this is where there is that void that is perhaps filled by organisations such as Change for Tottenham, perhaps, that don't necessarily have to, you know, they don't have to maintain a relationship with a club in the same way that you guys do. They're not trying to fix individual ticketing issues or whatever it might be, or ticket prices, or save our seniors and all of those important initiatives, but can have that single focus perhaps to give a voice to fans that are, you know, so unhappy with the ownership that they want the ownership to change, right? And I think it's probably now got to the stage with Change for Tottenham, and Bill's left us, so can't talk to it, but where I don't think it's just Change for Tottenham now, i.e. they don't just want the owners to change, they want them to change, as in they want them to sell the club, right? I think is probably fair, because I think they think that they've demonstrated over a long enough period now that they're not going to change in a positive way. And so I think that's the frustration right now. And obviously results massively impact where fans are, right? If we were sitting, you know, fourth or fifth or whatever, I'm sure we would feel differently. But unfortunately, it's probably the actions that the club have taken that have led to this downward spiral. I think just to wrap up, because I appreciate we've taken about an hour and 10 minutes of your time, and really, really appreciate your time, particularly in light of what's been a busy couple of days for you. I suppose just want to give you this opportunity in case there's anything else that you think is worth mentioning, particularly around you know, what's coming up for you guys in terms of any initiatives, or say, you know, the ticket prices. Obviously, we'll have the season ticket renewal at some point. I'm sure they're waiting for that, given our precarious situation and where we sit in the relegation battle. But I presume we're expecting that to be frozen at the very least, right?
They'd be very brave, I think, if they did anything other than freezer. But no, those discussions are ongoing. The club consults with us and with the fan advisory board on the proposals for next season. So that's all live and in discussion at the moment. So we can't really talk about that until decisions are made and that's been published. But the business as usual is carrying on, and yes, that will be released within the next few weeks, I think.
Very good. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that just to wrap up, yeah, would implore anyone who has not looked at it. Obviously, we've spoken about it at length today. Do go and look at those minutes, because I think it's important that you understand, the types of things that we were trying to get, that the trust were trying to get across. I think, I have a lot of sympathy with a lot of people in the chat, and don't worry, you are preaching to the converted when you're criticising the ownership, because I'm very, very critical of the ownership and wanting it to act in a completely different way than they currently do. But we carry on doing what we can, which is within our gift, and I think that's fair for the trust, right?
Yeah. I mean, anyone can get involved in the trust. As Tristan said, we're elected. Anyone can be elected. Anyone can, join and express a point of view. We had our AGM last week, so I think if the trust didn't exist, it'd have to be invented. It works both ways. The club needs really to have an organisation that it can turn to and hear from. So we can't keep all of the people happy all of the time, but I'd implore people to get involved and join up, and they can express their views through the trust, which would add to the numbers, would be great.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and huge thanks to everyone in the chat for your participation. And if you haven't already, please drop us a like and a subscribe on the way out. And we'll be back at the weekend with another show previewing the small matter of a North London derby. So actually, just before you go, love to get your predictions on that game, which we're all grimacing at the thought of. Perhaps slightly more optimistic now Frank has gone. Probably still not quite, but yeah, Tristan, I'll start with you. How are you feeling about the weekend? I assume you're going as well.
Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there with my boy. I'm going to go for new manager bounce, 2-1 win.
Very good. And Jo?
Yeah, I don't know if we'll get a win, but I'd like to think we could get a draw, maybe 1-1.
Yeah, I think that's probably the limit of my optimism, I have to say. I can't predict an Arsenal win and look myself in the mirror, so I'll stretch to a 1-1 draw as well, that we somehow nick. But we'll see. But yeah, thank you again, and one last thing to say, I suppose, is come on, you Spurs.
Yeah, come on, you Spurs.
Thanks for having us. Cheers.